Experts failed to fix the ship engine until an admiral called a brilliant black Navy veteran. The sea was calm that morning, but the shipyard was filled with tension. A massive Navy ship, the pride of the fleet, sat in silence at the dock. It was supposed to be out in the ocean, leading an important mission, yet here it was, stuck. The reason was simple but terrifying for everyone involved. The engine had failed. This was no ordinary engine. It was one of the largest and most complex machines ever built for a military ship. It powered thousands of tons of steel, carried hundreds of crew members, and was designed to face the harshest storms. But now, no matter what anyone tried, it refused to start. The crew walked nervously across the deck, whispering to each other. Some looked down at the ocean, ashamed that their ship, which was once called Unbreakable, could not even leave the dock. Others tried to stay positive, but the truth was clear. Everyone was worried. Inside the engine room, the situation was even worse. Wires were scattered, tools were lying around, and tired engineers wiped sweat from their foreheads. They had been working day and night, yet nothing worked. The room smelled of oil, metal, and disappointment. Lieutenant Harris, one of the younger officers, looked at the giant machine with disbelief. "We tried every system check, every restart sequence. Nothing changes," he muttered. His voice carried both frustration and fear. He knew the Admiral was watching closely, and failure was not an option. The Admiral, a tall man with years of leadership on his shoulders, walked slowly around the room. His sharp eyes scanned every detail. He had led men into battles, survived storms at sea, and made decisions that shaped the future of the Navy. But at that moment, even he felt powerless. "This ship is the heart of the fleet," he said firmly. "If it does not move, the entire mission is delayed. We cannot afford that." The silence that followed was heavy. The engineers avoided his eyes. Everyone knew what was at stake. The country had invested billions into this ship. Politicians, generals, and other admirals were already asking questions. Why was the pride of the Navy sitting useless in the harbor? In the mess hall, sailors sat quietly with their meals, but no one tasted the food. They were proud men and women, trained for courage and sacrifice, but this problem was different. This was not a storm they could fight with strength. This was not an enemy they could face with weapons. This was a silent engine, and it was defeating them all. Some sailors began to lose hope. Rumors spread quickly. "Maybe the ship was built wrong," one said. "Maybe the damage is too big to repair," another whispered. Fear grew like a shadow, creeping into every corner of the vessel. The Admiral called a meeting with the engineering team. He wanted answers. Around the table, experts from across the Navy sat with laptops, charts, and reports. They had advanced degrees, years of experience, and confidence in their skills. Yet today their faces told another story. One by one they explained what they had tried. Computer diagnostics, system resets, and advanced testing tools. Each solution ended with the same result. The engine stayed dead. "We are missing something," one expert said, frustration heavy in his tone. "It's not logical. Every reading looks normal, but the engine does not respond." Another added, "It could be a hidden flaw in the design. Maybe we need to dismantle the entire system, but that could take months." The Admiral listened carefully, but inside his chest, his heart tightened. He did not have months. He did not even have weeks. Time was running out, and the reputation of the Navy was at risk. When the meeting ended, the Admiral stayed behind. Alone in the silent room, he placed both hands on the table and closed his eyes. He thought of the sailors depending on him, of the mission that could not fail, and of the countless eyes watching his every move. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this one was different. Meanwhile, back in the engine room, Lieutenant Harris and a few sailors continued their efforts. Sweat ran down their faces as they adjusted bolts, tested circuits, and rechecked manuals. The sound of tools hitting metal echoed through the space, but each attempt ended in disappointment. At one point, Harris dropped his wrench and sat down heavily on a bench. "This is impossible," he whispered. The sailors around him looked equally defeated. For the first time in his career, Harris felt truly helpless. Outside, the massive American flag waved gently in the wind above the shipyard. To the sailors, it was a reminder of the promise they had made to serve and protect. But today, it also felt like a question hanging over them. Were they strong enough to overcome this? Night fell, and the ship remained silent. The lights of the harbor reflected off the calm water, creating a strange beauty around the lifeless vessel. Sailors lay in their bunks, but sleep refused to come. The sound of the silent engine haunted their dreams. The Admiral stood alone on the deck staring at the stars. He had led men through war, storms, and danger, but this problem kept him awake more than any battle ever had. He thought of the experts, their failed attempts, and the uncertainty that now surrounded them. For the first time, doubt touched his heart. He whispered to himself, "There must be someone who can fix this. There has to be." And deep inside, a memory returned to him, a name, a face, and a story from years ago. A man who had been called when all others had failed. A man who had served with honor, but whose brilliance was never fully recognized. The Admiral clenched his jaw. Perhaps the time had come to call upon him once again. The night ended, but hope was not gone. Somewhere out there was a Navy veteran who had faced engines like this before. Somewhere out there was the person who could do the impossible. And though no one yet knew it, that man's arrival would change everything. Morning arrived with a sense of urgency. The sun rose over the harbor, casting golden light across the silent ship. To outsiders, it looked like a sleeping giant. To those inside, it felt like a prison. The mission clock was ticking, and the Navy could not afford another wasted day. The Admiral had ordered more help. This time, not just the ship's engineers, but the best technical experts from across the country. They flew in on military jets, stepping off with confidence, briefcases in hand, laptops strapped to their backs. These were men and women who had graduated from top universities, written books on mechanical systems, and held reputations as problem solvers. When they walked into the engine room, the sailors stepped aside. Their crisp uniforms, polished shoes, and proud expressions made it clear they believed they were about to solve the mystery. Some of the younger sailors whispered to each other with relief. Finally, the experts had arrived. One of the engineers, Dr. Whitman, tapped on his tablet and looked at the enormous machine. "Gentlemen, we'll have this running in no time," he said with a smile. His words carried weight, but his eyes showed no respect for the tired crew who had been working day and night. The experts set up their equipment quickly. Computers were connected, wires ran across the floor, and the hum of electronic devices filled the room. They typed commands, checked readings, and ran simulation after simulation. Charts appeared on screens. Numbers scrolled rapidly, and graphs displayed colorful lines. To an untrained eye, it looked impressive. To the sailors, it looked like magic. But as hours passed, the truth revealed itself. For all their technology, the experts could not make the engine move. They adjusted valves, replaced sensors, and tested fuel flow. Each time they announced a new theory, the crew waited with hope. Each time, the engine answered with silence. By the end of the first day, frustration filled the air. The experts blamed the equipment, then blamed the ship's design, then blamed each other. Their confidence began to crack. One sailor, watching from the side, whispered to Lieutenant Harris, "Sir, they look lost." Harris only nodded. He wanted to believe in them, but deep down he felt the same. The Admiral entered the engine room later that evening, his eyes sharp and his face unreadable. He asked for a report. Dr. Whitman cleared his throat. "Admiral, we are facing unexpected complications. The system is more stubborn than we anticipated. We'll need more time." "Time is not a luxury we have," the Admiral replied firmly. His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that silences a room. "You were called here because the Navy cannot fail. I expect results." The experts nodded quickly, promising progress, but behind their confident gestures was growing fear. The next day, more attempts followed. They replaced parts, recalibrated systems, and even considered dismantling sections of the massive machine. At one point, sparks flew from a panel, causing smoke to fill the room. Sailors rushed to assist, but the experts waved them back, embarrassed by their mistake. The crew's faith in the outsiders began to fade. Where once there had been respect, now there was doubt. Some sailors muttered that the so-called geniuses were nothing more than showmen with expensive gadgets. One young sailor, Morales, spoke quietly to his friend. "All that education, all that money, and still they can't hear what this engine is trying to say. My grandfather was a mechanic. He used to say machines talk to you if you're willing to listen." The word stuck with Harris, though he kept silent. He knew Morales was right. Sometimes knowledge was not about charts and screens. Sometimes it was about listening. By the third day, tempers began to flare. The experts argued among themselves, accusing each other of overlooking critical details. The once confident Dr. Whitman slammed his tablet down in frustration. "This engine is defective," he declared. "There must be a flaw in its construction. No amount of work will fix it." The Admiral, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. His face was calm, but his voice was like steel. That engine was built by the best. It has sailed through storms and wars. It is not defective. The problem is not the ship. His words cut deep, leaving silence behind. The experts had no answer. That night, the Admiral sat in his quarters, staring at the reports scattered across his desk. Numbers, charts, and technical jargon filled the pages, but they brought him no closer to a solution. He thought of the sailors, the mission, and the pride of the Navy. He also thought of the growing disappointment in the eyes of his crew. In the mess hall, the atmosphere was heavy. Sailors ate quietly, their conversations filled with frustration. "The experts can't do it," one said bitterly. "If they can't fix it, then who can?" No one had an answer. The Admiral knew morale was breaking. He could not allow despair to take root. He remembered the old saying, "A ship is only as strong as the faith of its crew." Right now, their faith was fading fast. On the fourth day, the experts gathered in front of the Admiral with a final proposal. They wanted to dismantle the entire engine and rebuild it from the ground up. The process could take months, maybe longer. The Admiral shook his head. "Unacceptable. We don't have months. We don't even have weeks. This ship must sail." His words carried finality. The experts, out of solutions, lowered their heads. For the first time in their careers, they had to admit defeat. The Admiral dismissed them, his mind heavy with the weight of failure. As he walked back to his quarters, sailors watched him with anxious eyes. They wanted to believe in him, but they also knew that even their leader looked troubled. That evening, the Admiral stood on the deck once again, staring out at the sea. The sound of waves gently lapping against the hull seemed to mock him. His thoughts returned to a memory, one he had tried to push aside until now. Years ago, during a different mission, there had been another failure, an engine that no one could fix. The same panic, the same hopelessness had filled the air, and yet one man had walked into the chaos with calm confidence. A man with rough hands, quiet eyes, and wisdom born not from books, but from decades of hard work. That man had solved the problem in hours, not months. The Admiral whispered the name into the wind as if testing the memory. It felt distant but powerful. He knew what had to be done. The experts had failed. The crew was losing hope, but there was still one chance, one man who could turn the tide. A veteran, a forgotten hero, and the Admiral was ready to call him back. The harbor was quiet that night, but inside the Admiral's quarters, silence felt heavy, almost crushing. Papers were spread across his desk, glowing under a single lamp. Reports, diagnostic charts, and failed assessments all told him the same story. The experts had tried and they had failed. The ship, the largest and most expensive in the fleet, was still silent. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had commanded ships through storms, led sailors in war zones, and made decisions that risked lives but protected the nation. Yet now, in peacetime, a silent machine was breaking him. He closed his eyes and thought of the faces of his sailors. Young men and women who had sworn an oath, who had families waiting for them, who looked to him for leadership. They trusted him to find answers. But how could he lead when even the best minds in the country had walked away in defeat? The sound of the ocean outside his window reminded him of what was at stake. This ship was not just steel and bolts. It was a symbol. It carried the weight of pride, security, and the promise of safety for the people at home. To let it sit useless in the harbor was unthinkable. A knock came at his door. "Enter," he said, his voice low but firm. Lieutenant Harris stepped inside, saluting quickly. His young face looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. "Admiral, I thought you should know. The experts are leaving tomorrow morning. They said there is nothing more they can do." The Admiral nodded slowly, not surprised. "And the crew?" he asked. "They're restless, sir," Harris admitted. "Some are losing hope. Morale is slipping. They want answers." The Admiral rose from his chair and walked to the window. The lights of the harbor reflected off the still water. "They deserve answers," he said quietly. "And they deserve a leader who won't give up." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Harris hesitated before saying, "Sir, may I be honest?" The Admiral turned and nodded. "Always." Harris took a breath. "Sir, I think we've been looking in the wrong place. The experts, they rely on machines, on data, on numbers. But maybe what we need is someone who understands this engine in a different way. Someone who's lived with machines like these, not just studied them. Someone who knows their language." The Admiral studied the young officer carefully. Harris's words echoed what he himself had been thinking but had not yet admitted. There was someone like that once, the Admiral said slowly, almost as if speaking to himself. A man I served with years ago. He could hear what machines were saying when no one else could. We called him the Engine Whisperer. He was a veteran, a true sailor, brilliant, but he retired long ago. Harris leaned forward, eyes filled with hope. Do you think he could help us now, sir? The Admiral did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the window, staring at the silent ship. His mind traveled back in time. He remembered a younger version of himself, standing on a different ship, panicking when its engines failed during a mission. He remembered how this man had arrived calmly, wearing nothing fancy, carrying no advanced tools. Just his hands, his instincts, and a mind sharper than any textbook. Within hours, the engine had roared back to life. Yes, the Admiral finally said. If anyone can help us, it's him. But sir, Harris said carefully, he's retired. Do you think he would come back? The Admiral straightened, resolve hardening in his eyes. If I ask him, he will. That night, the Admiral wrote a personal letter. He did not dictate it to an assistant. He did not type it on a computer. He took out pen and paper because he knew the man he was writing to deserved more than formality. The letter was short, but powerful. Old friend, I find myself in a battle not against men, but against silence. The pride of our fleet lies powerless in the harbor, and no expert can bring it back. I know only one man who can. The Navy needs you again. I need you again. Will you come? When he finished, the Admiral sealed the letter with his own hand. He gave it directly to a courier, instructing him to deliver it immediately. The next morning, while the experts packed their equipment in shame, the Admiral stood on the deck, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The crew watched him silently, sensing that something had changed in their leader. There was no speech, no announcement, but they felt a spark of determination in his presence. Hours turned into a day, and whispers began to spread. The Admiral has called for someone, the sailor said quietly. Not another expert, someone different. Morale, though still low, carried a flicker of curiosity now. Who was this person the Admiral trusted so deeply? That evening, Harris approached the Admiral again. Sir, with all respect, may I ask, who is he? The Admiral allowed a rare smile to cross his face. A man who served this Navy with more honor than most will ever know. He's not in the textbooks. He's not in the halls of power. But when machines failed and hope was gone, he never did. He fixed the impossible not with science alone, but with wisdom. His name is Samuel Reed. Harris repeated the name softly, committing it to memory. The Admiral placed a firm hand on his shoulder. When he arrives, watch closely. You'll see what true brilliance looks like, and you'll learn that sometimes the greatest minds are the ones the world forgets. That night, as the ship remained still, a quiet sense of anticipation replaced the despair. The crew did not yet know the details, but they trusted their Admiral. He had not given up, and neither should they. The Admiral returned to his quarters and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He had made his choice. The experts had failed. But now he was calling on someone greater, not because of titles or degrees, but because of experience, character, and unshakable will. As he closed his eyes, he whispered a prayer to the sea itself. Let him come. Let him guide us, and let this ship sail again. Somewhere miles away in a modest home far from the noise of the Navy, an old veteran was about to receive a letter that would pull him back into service, a letter that would remind him that his wisdom was still needed. And soon the silent ship would meet the man destined to bring it back to life. 2 days later, the harbor buzzed with an unusual kind of anticipation. Word had spread across the shipyard. The Admiral had called someone special. Not another expert, not another team with computers and machines, but one man, a veteran. Sailors whispered about it in the corridors in the mess hall, curious about who this man could be. Some laughed at the idea. One old sailor is supposed to do what a dozen experts couldn't? A young technician scoffed. That's impossible, but others held on to hope. They had seen the Admiral's eyes, the way his confidence returned when he spoke of this man. They knew their leader did not believe in empty chances. The following morning, the crew gathered near the dock as a black car approached the base. It moved slowly, without the drama of sirens or escorts, but somehow its presence turned every head. When the car stopped, the door opened and a man stepped out. He was not dressed like the others. No polished shoes, no crisp uniform. Instead, he wore an old orange worksuit faded at the seams, with a patch that simply read U.S. His cap bore the words Veteran Air Force, though everyone knew he had worked across branches during his service. His face was lined with age, his eyes hidden behind clear glasses, and his hands were rough, the hands of a man who had worked with machines his entire life. This was Samuel Reed. The Admiral himself walked down the gangway to greet him. "Sam," he said warmly, extending his hand. Reed shook it firmly, his voice low but steady. "Admiral, been a long time." The sailors standing nearby watched in silence. There was no salute, no grand ceremony. Yet something about the simple handshake carried more weight than any official welcome could. It was respect, earned, not demanded. "Thank you for coming," the Admiral said. "You said the ship needs me," Reed replied. "That means the country needs me." I couldn't say no. They walked together into the engine room where the massive, silent machine waited. The experts had left behind a mess of wires, screens, and notes. The sailors stood at attention, curious but skeptical, their eyes fixed on the older man who had just entered. Reed stopped in front of the engine. He did not touch it immediately. He just stood there, staring at the giant machine with quiet intensity. The room grew silent as everyone waited. After a long pause, he reached out his hand and placed it gently on the cold metal, almost as if greeting an old friend. "This engine is tired," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. The sailors exchanged puzzled glances. To them, it was just a machine. How could someone describe it as tired? But Reed did not explain. Instead, he walked slowly around the engine, studying every detail. He listened to the faint echoes inside the chamber, the creaks of steel and the smell of oil. Lieutenant Harris finally spoke, his voice respectful but cautious. "Sir, we've already tried every system test, every reset. Nothing works. The experts said it might be defective." Reed glanced at him briefly. "Machines are like people, Lieutenant. If you treat them like numbers on a screen, they'll stay silent. But if you listen, they'll tell you what's wrong." The words struck Harris deeply. He had heard his own sailor, Morales, say something similar days ago. One of the younger officers, less patient, muttered under his breath, "Listening to machines? This is ridiculous," but the Admiral heard him. His sharp eyes turned to the group. "Respect him," he ordered. "He's here because he's earned the right to be." Reed ignored the comment. He moved closer to the heart of the engine, crouched down and placed his ear against the metal. For several minutes he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and pointed to a panel on the side. "Open this," he said. A sailor hurried forward and unscrewed the bolts. Inside, the compartment looked ordinary to most eyes, filled with wires and pipes. But Reed leaned closer, examining every detail. He ran his fingers across a pipe, lifted a small valve, and smelled the oil on his fingertips. He shook his head. "Too clean," he murmured. "They flushed it too much. Stripped away the protective film. That's why it's seizing." The sailor stared at him in disbelief. No chart, no screen, no diagnostic report had mentioned this. Harris stepped forward. "Are you saying the problem is too much cleaning?" Reed nodded. "Engines like this need balance. Oil doesn't just lubricate. It protects, it carries the memory of the machine. If you strip it bare, it loses its rhythm. These experts treated it like a broken computer. But this isn't a computer. It's a living system." The Admiral's lips curved into the faintest smile. This was exactly why he had called Reed. The man saw what others could not. Still, doubt lingered among the crew. One sailor whispered, "Is that really it? After all this, just oil?" Reed turned, his deep voice carrying across the room. "Don't mistake simple for easy. The smallest detail can bring down the largest ship. The question is whether you respect the machine enough to see it." His words silenced the doubters. Reed rolled up his sleeves and asked for tools. Nothing fancy, just wrenches, rags, and a bucket. He refused the computers, the scanners, the advanced equipment left behind by the experts. "All I need is my hands," he said. The sailors watched as he began his work. His movements were steady, deliberate, and filled with patience. He adjusted bolts, cleared out buildup, and carefully re-oiled certain parts. It looked simple, almost too simple, but there was a rhythm in his actions. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times before, guided not by manuals but by instinct. Hours passed, but no one complained. They watched in silence, fascinated by the quiet authority in Reed's work. Even the skeptical officers began to see something different. This was not guesswork. This was mastery. At one point, Harris leaned toward Morales and whispered, "He's not fixing just the engine. He's teaching us something." Morales nodded. "Yeah, he's teaching us to listen." By evening, Reed wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. "It's not ready yet," he admitted. "But we're closer. Tomorrow we'll try again." The Admiral nodded, fully trusting him. "Whatever you need, you'll have." That night, the crew gathered in the mess hall, buzzing with conversation. For the first time in days, there was energy in their voices. Some were still skeptical, but most felt something they had not felt in weeks: hope. One sailor said, "I don't know if he'll fix it, but I believe he sees things the rest don't." Another added, "If the Admiral trusts him, I trust him." And slowly, the mood of the ship began to change. Back in his quarters, Reed sat alone with a notebook. He sketched out the layout of the engine, making small notes and adjustments. His face was calm, his focus sharp. For him, this was not just about fixing a machine. It was about proving that wisdom, patience, and respect still mattered in a world that worshipped technology. He whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we'll wake her up." And as the ship rested under the stars, everyone knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. The next morning, the harbor awoke with renewed curiosity. The massive ship still stood in silence, but something had shifted. The sailors walked with straighter backs, conversations carried a little more energy, and even the air in the engine room felt lighter. They knew Samuel Reed was working on the problem, and for the first time in weeks they had a reason to hope. Reed arrived early, carrying nothing but a small toolbox and a notebook filled with his own scribbles. He looked around the engine room, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. The Admiral, already there, nodded at him respectfully. "Do what you need, Sam," the Admiral said. "This crew is at your command." Reed gave a simple nod. "Then we start with the basics." The sailors expected him to power up the computers, to dive into digital diagnostics, or to order advanced scans. Instead, he reached for a wrench and a flashlight. His approach was so simple that some of the younger officers exchanged doubtful glances. One whispered, "He's wasting time." But Harris silenced them with a sharp look. "Watch, learn," he said firmly. Reed began with the fuel lines. He ran his hands along the pipes, knocking them lightly with his knuckles, listening to the hollow sound they made. "Hear that?" he asked a group of sailors gathered nearby. They shook their heads. Reed smiled faintly. "That's the sound of trapped air. It's not in the reports because the computers don't pick it up, but you can hear it if you listen close." He showed them how to bleed the line carefully, releasing the air bubble that had been choking part of the system. The sailors leaned in, fascinated. For weeks, teams of experts had missed this simple issue because they relied on screens instead of senses. Next, Reed moved to the oil valves. He wiped away the spotless shine the experts had left behind, smearing a bit of the oil between his fingers. "Too thin," he muttered. "This oil is sliding off instead of clinging. That's why the gears won't grip." He explained it in plain language. "Engines are like people. You can't strip them bare and expect them to run smooth. They need something to hold on to. Respect that and they'll work with you." The sailors nodded, their respect for him growing with every word. As the hours passed, Reed continued teaching. He pulled out parts the experts had declared normal and showed hidden wear that only experience could spot. He tightened bolts with just enough pressure, explaining how too much force could stress the metal, while too little would make it loose. One sailor, Morales, finally asked, "Sir, how do you know all this without the machines? Without the data?" Reed paused, looking the young man in the eye. "Because I've been listening to machines longer than you've been alive. Data tells you numbers, but numbers don't tell you the soul of the machine. That you learn only by touch, by sound, by respect." His words struck deep. Morales felt as though he was being given more than just a lesson about engines. He was being given a lesson about life. By midday, sweat ran down Reed's forehead, but he never slowed. His hands were steady, his focus unbroken. The Admiral watched closely, saying little, but inside he felt pride. He had trusted the right man. Some officers, still doubtful, whispered among themselves, "All this just by hand? He's relying on luck." But their whispers stopped when Reed called them over. He pointed to a small section of wiring hidden deep within the engine. "This right here," he said, "is the heart of your problem. See the wear? It's small, barely visible, but under pressure, It causes the system to stall. The computers won't show it because it's not a complete break, but it's enough to stop the engine from breathing. The officers leaned in, stunned. They had looked at those wires a dozen times, scanned them with sensors, and declared them fine. Yet Reed, with nothing but his eyes and his hands, had found the flaw. "Replace it," Reed instructed. The sailors scrambled to fetch the part. When it was fitted, Reed checked it once more, making tiny adjustments the others would never have thought necessary. He stepped back, wiping his hands. "Now," he said, "we're ready to test her heart again." The Admiral nodded, and the order was given. The sailors held their breath as the ignition sequence began. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a groan, the engine turned slightly. Not much, just enough to make the entire room erupt in gasps. It was the first sound of life in weeks, but Reed raised his hand. "Not yet. She's waking, but not ready to run. Patience." He returned to the machine, adjusting valves again, fine-tuning the balance. He worked not like a man repairing, but like a man coaxing a stubborn friend back to life. His calm movements reassured the crew, showing them that progress was coming, even if slowly. By evening, the engine was humming faintly, though not fully alive. Still, it was enough to lift spirits across the ship. Sailors laughed for the first time in days. Officers who had doubted began to fall silent, humbled by what they had seen. In the mess hall, the conversations carried excitement.
"Did you hear that sound?"
One sailor exclaimed. "It's breathing again." Another added, "He found things the experts couldn't even see. He's teaching us more in a day than they did in a week." Meanwhile, Reed sat quietly with a simple plate of food. He did not bask in the praise or boast of his progress. He simply ate, nodded politely when sailors thanked him, and then returned to his notebook. To him, this was not about glory. It was about duty. That night, Harris joined him. "Sir," he said sincerely, "you've given this crew hope again. You've shown us that sometimes knowledge isn't in the tools. It's in the hands and the heart." Reed looked at him with steady eyes. "Remember that, Lieutenant. Machines, people, life, it's all the same. If you forget the human part, you'll always fail." The next day, he would bring the engine fully back to life. But for now, the lesson had already begun to spread across the ship. True wisdom does not always come from technology. Sometimes it comes from patience, respect, and a lifetime of listening, and Samuel Reed was living proof. The third morning dawned with a restless energy across the ship. Sailors woke earlier than usual, dressing quickly as if something big was about to happen. Even those who had been skeptical felt it in their bones. Today would be different. For weeks, the ship had been nothing more than a giant piece of steel sitting silently in the harbor. But now whispers filled the corridors. "The engine will breathe today." Samuel Reed walked into the engine room carrying the same small toolbox and notebook. His uniform was still plain, his steps calm, but there was something unshakable in the way he carried himself. He was a man who knew what had to be done. Behind him, the Admiral followed, hands clasped firmly behind his back, eyes sharp but hopeful. The crew was already waiting. Some stood at attention, others leaned forward in anticipation. Lieutenant Harris moved quickly to greet Reed. "Sir, everything is prepared. The parts you asked for were fitted last night. The crew is ready to assist." Reed gave a simple nod. "Good, today she wakes." The silence in the room was thick. Every sailor leaned closer. Every officer held their breath, waiting for the miracle they desperately needed. Reed stepped up to the giant engine. For a moment, he placed his hand gently on the steel casing the way a doctor might feel the pulse of a patient. His eyes closed briefly as though he were listening to something only he could hear. Then he rolled up his sleeves and turned to the crew. "This engine has been treated like a broken computer," he said. "But it is not a computer. It is a living system of steel, oil, and breath. It needs balance, not force. Today we give it that balance," he pointed to Harris. "Lieutenant, prepare ignition sequence 1. Aye." "Sir," Harris replied, signaling the team. The sailors moved quickly, hands on controls, ready to follow Reed's every instruction. Reed crouched by the valves, tightening some, loosening others with precise movements. "Fuel flow, steady now," he called. "Not too much, not too little. Respect the rhythm." As he worked, he explained to the younger sailors nearby. "Engines are like people. Push them too hard, they break. Neglect them, they fade. But if you respect them, they give you everything." The sailors nodded, their eyes wide, absorbing every word. Finally, Reed stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at Harris. "Start her." Harris hesitated for just a heartbeat, then gave the order. "Ignition now!" The switch was pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, filled with the weight of expectation. Then came a low groan, like the sound of a giant awakening from sleep. The engine turned once, then stalled. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the room. Some officers shook their heads, whispering that it was too much to hope for, but Reed raised his hand calmly. "Patience," he said. "She's not ready yet." He walked back to the engine, adjusted a single bolt, tapped lightly on a pipe, then returned. His movements were small, almost invisible, but carried with them decades of instinct. "Again," he commanded. The switch was pulled once more. This time the groan was louder, followed by a rumble that shook the floor. The giant machine coughed, stalled, then roared again, louder than before. The sailors gasped, gripping the railings as the sound filled the engine room. Reed's eyes lit up with quiet satisfaction. "That's it." "She's trying." The Admiral leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. For weeks he had watched this ship sit lifeless, his hope fading. Now for the first time he allowed himself to believe once more. Reed shouted. Harris gave the order. The ignition roared, and this time the engine thundered to life. The room shook as steel vibrated, pipes hummed, and the deep, powerful heartbeat of the ship returned. It was not just sound, it was life. The sailors erupted in cheers, their voices echoing across the chamber. Some laughed, some shouted, and a few even had tears in their eyes. They had thought this moment might never come, and now it was here. The Admiral stood tall, his chest swelling with pride. He turned to Reed, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You did it, Sam. You brought her back." But Reed only shook his head. "No, Admiral. She did it. I just reminded her how." The Admiral extended his hand once more, and this time the entire crew watched as the two men shook hands. It was a moment of history, one that every sailor in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. Harris stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "Sir, what you did today, the experts said it was impossible." Reed gave him a small smile. "Experts forget that machines, like people, don't always follow the rules written on paper. They follow the rules of life. Listen, and you'll hear them." The engine continued to roar, steady and strong, as if proud of its rebirth. The vibrations traveled through the deck, up the corridors, and across the entire ship. Sailors rushed to the railings, listening to the sound they had missed for so long. To them, it was the sound of hope, of strength, of pride. News spread quickly through the harbor. Workers, officers, and even civilians nearby came to see the miracle. The ship that had sat in silence for weeks was alive again, its heart beating with renewed power. In the mess hall later that evening, the atmosphere was electric. Sailors laughed, clapped each other on the back, and told the story of how Samuel Reed had done what no one else could. He listened, Morales explained proudly to a group of younger sailors. That's all. He listened when everyone else just looked at screens. Meanwhile, Reed sat quietly in a corner, his plate half full. He did not celebrate loudly, nor did he seek attention. He simply watched the crew, content to see their pride return. For him, that was the true reward. The Admiral approached him, setting a hand firmly on his shoulder. "Sam, the Navy owes you more than words can say. You saved this ship, this crew, and perhaps even this mission." Reed looked up at him, his eyes steady. "Admiral, I didn't do it for medals or recognition. I did it because the Navy is family. And when family calls, you answer." The Admiral nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. That night, as the ship's engine hummed steadily, sailors slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The nightmare of silence was gone, replaced by the comforting rhythm of power. On the deck, Reed stood alone, gazing out at the sea. The stars reflected in the water, and the cool wind brushed against his face. He closed his eyes, listening not to the ocean this time, but to the steady thrum of the engine behind him. It was alive, and so was the spirit of everyone aboard. The ship was alive again. For days, its engine roared like thunder across the harbor, and the sound carried far beyond the shipyard. Civilians walking along the docks stopped to stare. Sailors from other vessels turned their heads, and officers across the Navy whispered the same thing. It is back. But more powerful than the sound of the engine was the change it brought to the hearts of the crew. Sailors walked with renewed pride, their steps strong, their shoulders squared. They were no longer the crew of a silent, broken ship. They were once again guardians of a living, breathing vessel. Samuel Reed, the man who had made it possible, did not seek recognition. He moved quietly through the ship, answering questions, teaching young sailors and showing them not just how to maintain a machine, but how to respect it. Wherever he went, sailors leaned closer, eager to hear his words. One evening, Morales approached him nervously, holding a wrench in his hand. "Sir," he said, "can I ask you something?" Reed looked up from the engine panel he was checking. "Go ahead." Morales shifted on his feet. "How did you learn all this? How do you know what no one else seems to know?" Reed smiled faintly. "I learned it the hard way. Years at sea, long nights in engine rooms just like this one, listening when no one else would. Every mistake taught me something. Every failure gave me another chance to learn. And above all, I never treated a machine as just steel. I treated it as a partner." Morales nodded slowly, gripping the wrench tighter. "I want to learn like that too." Reed placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Then promise me this, you'll never let pride blind you. Don't think you're too smart to listen. Don't think you're too important to get your hands dirty. Respect your work, respect your ship, respect your people. Do that, and you'll be more than an engineer. You'll be a leader." The words sank deep into Morales's heart. He knew he would never forget them. Across the ship, similar moments were happening. Harris, once uncertain, now followed Reed closely, taking notes, asking questions, and learning lessons that no textbook could ever teach. To him, Reed was more than a mechanic. He was a mentor. One afternoon, Harris asked, "Sir, what do you think makes the difference between those experts who failed and you?" Reed thought for a moment before answering. "They trusted only their tools. I trust my experience. They read numbers. I read people and machines. They saw a problem to solve. I saw a life to save. That's the difference." The Admiral, too, watched these exchanges with quiet pride. He had known Reed's value, but even he was surprised at how much the man had given to the crew in such a short time. It wasn't just that Reed had fixed the engine. It was that he had awakened something inside every sailor who watched him. Soon, the ship was ready to sail again. The Admiral gathered the crew on deck for a formal address. The sun glistened off the water, the American flag waved proudly in the breeze, and the sound of the engine below was steady and strong. "My sailors," the Admiral began, his voice deep and commanding, "today we stand not as a crew of a broken vessel, but as guardians of one of the greatest ships in this fleet. For weeks we struggled, we doubted, we even feared. But now, because of the wisdom and dedication of one man, we rise again." The crew erupted in cheers, turning their eyes toward Reed. He stood humbly in the crowd, his hands folded, his face calm. The Admiral continued, "Let this day remind us of something we must never forget, that knowledge is valuable, but wisdom is priceless. Technology can guide us, but human experience will save us. And respect, for our work, for our machines, and for each other, will always be our greatest strength." The sailors stood taller, inspired by the words. Some had tears in their eyes, others clenched their fists in determination. They knew they had lived through something historic. As the ship prepared to leave the harbor, Reed stood by the railings, watching the crew move with purpose. Harris joined him, saluting sharply. "Sir, the ship is ready." Reed nodded. "Good. Keep her alive." The great vessel pulled away from the dock, its engine roaring proudly. Civilians on shore waved. Officers from other ships saluted, and the crew cheered. For weeks this ship had been doubted, ridiculed, even called useless. Now it was stronger than ever, and at the center of it all was Samuel Reed. When they returned from their first voyage after the repair, the Admiral invited Reed to his quarters. He poured him a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "Sam," the Admiral said, his voice heavy with gratitude, "you've done more than fix an engine. You've restored faith. You've reminded us what leadership truly is." "The Navy owes you," Reed shook his head. "I didn't do it for the Navy. I did it for the men and women who serve it. They deserve to believe again." The Admiral leaned forward. "Then at least let me promise you this. Your name will not be forgotten. What you've taught us will echo through this fleet for generations." Reed simply smiled. If they remember the lesson, that's enough. And indeed, the lesson did echo. Sailors who had once doubted began to trust their instincts more. Officers who had relied only on screens now listened to their machines, their crews, and their own experience. The story of the silent ship that came back to life spread across the Navy, told again and again in mess halls, training schools, and family gatherings. Experts failed.
Technology failed.
But one man, a veteran with wisdom in his hands and respect in his heart, succeeded. For young sailors, it became a story of inspiration. For officers, it became a reminder of humility. And for the Admiral, it became proof that true leadership is not found in rank or medals, but in the courage to trust the right people. When Reed finally left the ship, the crew lined up along the deck to salute him. Morales whispered, "There goes the man who taught us to listen," Harris added. "There goes the man who reminded us what it means to serve." And the Admiral, standing tall, whispered to himself, "There goes the man who saved us all." As Reed walked away, the ship's engine rumbled in the background, strong and alive. It was more than a sound, it was his legacy. A legacy that would live on every time that ship sailed. Every time a young sailor bent close to listen to the heartbeat of a machine, and every time someone remembered that respect, patience, and wisdom can do what the smartest experts cannot. The lesson had echoed, and it would never fade.